I remember the sound of ice in crystal, that particular musical chime when you tilt the glass just right, when the cubes shift against each other and the walls, when condensation makes everything slick and perfect. I can still hear it. Sometimes I think that sound is what I miss most, not because of what it was, but because of what it meant. It meant I could afford to care about something as small as the quality of a sound. The tower stood 63 floors above what used to be the financial district. From my window on the 47th floor, I could see the ruins spread out like a diagram of failure. Grey buildings with their skin peeled back, streets that had become rivers of dust, the skeleton of the old bridge visible through the haze, its cables hanging like tendons from a corpse. On clear days, and there were still clear days, back then you could see all the way to the water. What passed for water? The bay had turned the color of old bruises, purple and yellow and sick, but inside, everything worked. The lights came on when you entered a room. The temperature never varied more than 2 degrees from 72. Water came from the taps clear enough to see through, treated and filtered and tested 3 times daily. Food appeared on plates that had been warmed to exactly the right temperature. Vegetables that were actually green. Meat that hadn't come from something with 2 heads or tumors growing through its ribs. Bread that rose properly because the flour came from hydroponics gardens buried 6 floors below ground level, where the soil had been manufactured grain by grain to be free of everything that made the outside world poisonous. I had lived there for 7 years when the first person disappeared. Her name was Margaret Ashford, 63 years old, owned 3 floors in the East Wing, made her money before the bombs in pharmaceuticals, rode out the initial chaos in a private bunker in Vermont, emerged with enough caps and connections to buy her way into Summit Tower when it opened. I knew her the way you know everyone in a place like that distantly, through careful politeness and the occasional nod in the lobby. She wore her grey hair in a tight bun. She collected pre-war books. She never smiled, but she also never complained, which made her better company than most. One morning she simply wasn't there anymore. Her apartment went dark. Her name disappeared from the resident directory in the lobby. When I asked Marcus, one of the building coordinators, he looked at me with that particular expression they all learned to wear, sympathetic, concerned, completely empty. Mrs. Ashford decided to pursue opportunities elsewhere, he said. We wish her well in her future endeavors. The script was so polished you could see your reflection in it. I didn't think much about it at the time. People left. It happened. Not often, but it happened. The world outside was still terrible, but it wasn't actively trying to kill you anymore. Settlements had stabilized. Trade routes existed. If you had the resources and the stupidity, you could try your luck elsewhere. Maybe Margaret had family somewhere. Maybe she'd gotten tired of living in a box, even a comfortable box. But her furniture was still there. I could see it through her windows when I passed by on the maintenance walkway during my morning walk. The books were still on their shelves. The painting she'd hung above her sofa, some pre-war landscape, mountains and a lake, was still crooked the way it had always been crooked, listing slightly to the left because she'd never bothered to fix it. People who leave take their things. I kept walking. Summit Tower had been designed by someone who understood that luxury after the apocalypse couldn't look like luxury before it. No gold fixtures or crystal chandeliers, nothing ostentatious. Instead, everything was clean, aggressively clean, white walls, pale wood floors, chrome and glass and careful lighting that never glared. The aesthetic was clarity, transparency. The message was, we have nothing to hide because we have everything under control. Residents paid in caps, in old world currency that still held value in certain circles, in favors and connections, and sometimes in things that weren't discussed in public spaces. The building's security force numbered 43. They wore grey suits instead of armor, carried weapons that looked more like accessories than tools, smiled when they checked your identification at every threshold. They called everyone sir or ma'am. They never raised their voices. They also never left the building. I had come to Summit Tower the way most people did, through desperation disguised as choice. 3 years after the bombs, I'd been working salvage in the ruins, pulling copper wire and intact circuit boards from buildings that groaned when the wind blew, that shed concrete dust like snow, that smelled like burned metal and old death. I was good at it. Good enough to accumulate resources, good enough to attract attention. A woman named Victoria Hess approached me in a trading post. She was older, professionally pleasant, dressed in clothes that had been cleaned recently. She represented Summit Tower, she said. They were looking for people with specific skills. Engineers, doctors, people who could contribute to a functioning society. People who understood that civilization required sacrifice and structure. She made it sound like an honor. The interview process took 6 weeks. Physical examinations, psychological evaluations, background checks that seemed pointless in a world where most records had been vaporized. They wanted to know everything. What I'd done before the war, what I'd done after, who I knew, what I believed, whether I had family, whether I'd ever been arrested, whether I'd ever been sick with anything that might be contagious. I passed. They gave me an apartment on the 47th floor. 2 rooms, a window facing west, a kitchen that I never used because all meals were provided in the communal dining areas, a bathroom with water pressure that never faltered, a bed that had been assembled from pre-war materials with sheets that smelled like they'd been washed in something other than irradiated river water and desperation. The first night I stood at the window for 3 hours, watching the darkness outside, listening to the silence inside. No wind moaning through broken walls, no distant screams, no crackling of fires or the wet sounds of things moving through rubble. Just silence. Climate control, the faint hum of machinery keeping everything stable. I should have felt grateful. Instead, I felt purchased. But I stayed. Of course I stayed. Outside was radiation and raiders and things that had been human once. Outside was starvation and disease and the constant calculation of whether you'd live another day. Inside was safety. Inside was regular meals and clean water and the promise that tomorrow would look exactly like today. It was enough. It had to be enough. The second disappearance happened 4 months after Margaret. This time it was one of the engineers, a man named Paul Chen, who maintained the water filtration systems. I knew him slightly better than I'd known Margaret. We'd worked together occasionally, troubleshooting problems with the building's recycling infrastructure. He was competent, quiet. He had a wife and a daughter who lived on the 31st floor. One morning he didn't show up for his shift. His wife reported him missing. Security investigated. 3 days later, his wife and daughter were also gone. The Chen family has chosen to relocate, the official statement said. We respect their decision and wish them prosperity. But Paul Chen had loved his work. I'd seen it in the way he talked about the filtration systems, the way his hands moved when he explained the cascade process, the careful pride in his voice when he described how they'd managed to reduce contamination to nearly undetectable levels. He wouldn't have left voluntarily, not without telling someone, not without making arrangements for his systems. And his wife had been terrified. I'd seen her in the halls the day after he disappeared, her face pale and tight, her hands shaking when she tried to drink her coffee in the dining area. She'd looked at the security personnel with the expression of someone who knew exactly how powerless she was. Then she was gone. I started paying attention. The building operated on schedules, meals at fixed times, maintenance windows, cleaning rotations, security patrols that followed predictable routes. Everything documented, everything logged. The appearance of order was as important as actual order, maybe more important. Residents were encouraged to participate in community activities, educational lectures, entertainment screenings, social gatherings in the common areas on the 20th floor, where people who had nothing in common stood around drinking purified water with lemon slices and pretending they were still civilized. I attended sometimes, not often enough to draw attention by my absence, but not so often that I'd have to pretend to enjoy it. Dr. Sarah Vance ran the medical facilities on the 15th floor. I'd met her during my intake examination. She was 40-something, professionally warm, with grey eyes that seemed to catalogue everything they saw. She asked questions like she was conducting research rather than conversation. At one of the social gatherings, she stood near the window with a glass of something clear, watching the room with the detachment of someone studying a specimen. "Do you ever miss it?" I asked her. She turned to look at me. "Miss what?" "Outside. The uncertainty." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Uncertainty is just another word for chaos. Here, we have systems. Systems work. Until they don't." Her smile sharpened. "Then we fix them. That's what systems are for." She walked away before I could respond. 3 weeks later, Dr. Vance disappeared. No announcement this time. Just absence. Her office was locked. Her name removed from the directory. When I asked about her, the response was the same polished emptiness. Personal reasons, relocation, respect for privacy. But I'd seen her the day before. She'd been in the dining area, her face drawn and tired, dark circles under her eyes. She'd been arguing with someone in a grey suit, not loudly, not drawing attention, just intense, quiet conversation that ended with her walking away, rigid-spined and furious. The next day, gone. I started counting. In 7 years, 14 people had disappeared, 14 official relocations, 14 instances of possessions left behind, routines abandoned, lives erased with the efficiency of someone deleting files. No pattern in who. Young and old, men and women, engineers and doctors, and people whose contributions I couldn't identify. The only commonality was that they'd all been there for years. They'd all been integrated. They'd all been, by every visible measure, secure. I began keeping notes. Nothing elaborate, just dates and names written in the margins of technical manuals, disguised as maintenance logs. Nothing that would look suspicious if someone searched my apartment. Nothing that would mark me as trouble, because that was the unspoken rule at Summit Tower. Don't be trouble. Don't ask questions that implied criticism. Don't form groups that might become factions. Don't discuss politics or policy or anything that might suggest the system wasn't perfect. Don't acknowledge that anything was wrong, because acknowledging problems meant becoming a problem, and problems got solved. I kept my head down, did my work, maintained the electrical systems and the backup generators and all the small mechanical pieces that kept the building functioning. I was useful. Being useful was the only insurance policy worth having. The social gatherings became more frequent, mandatory, though they never used that word, strongly encouraged. Attendance was taken, absence was noted. They brought in entertainment. Pre-war films projected on clean white walls. Musicians who played instruments that had somehow survived intact. Speakers who gave lectures about history and culture and the importance of preserving civilization. The subtext was always the same. You are the lucky ones. You are the chosen. You have a responsibility to maintain what we've built here. And we did feel lucky. Most of the time. Because outside still existed. Outside was still terrible. Every time someone returned from an approved excursion, and those were rare, carefully controlled, documented extensively, they came back shaken, quiet. They didn't talk about what they'd seen, but you could read it in their faces. The wasteland wasn't getting better. If anything, it was getting worse. So we stayed inside our clean white box and told ourselves we were grateful. I met James Rivera during a repair call to the 39th floor. A water leak, minor but persistent. He answered the door in clothes that had been expensive once, now worn soft with age. Late 50s. Thin in the way people get when they've been hungry and then fed again but never quite lose the shape of starvation. He watched me work with the attention of someone who had nothing else to do. "You've been here a while," he said. "Not a question. 7 years. Do you like it?" I looked up from the pipe joint I was sealing. "It's better than the alternative." He laughed. It sounded like something breaking. That's what they count on. I didn't respond, didn't ask what he meant, finished the repair, logged it in my tablet, prepared to leave. Dr. Vance used to live across the hall from me, he said. I stopped. She was upset about something. The week before she left, I could hear her pacing, walking back and forth. She never slept. I know because I don't sleep much either, and I could hear her through the walls. Maybe she had insomnia. Maybe. He paused. Or maybe she found something she wasn't supposed to find. I met his eyes. They were dark and tired and absolutely certain. Be careful, he said. I left without acknowledging the warning. But I was careful. I'd always been careful. The building's administrative offices occupied the 60th through 63rd floors. Restricted access. Security checkpoints. You needed authorization just to use the elevator to those levels. I'd been up there once, during my initial intake, and the impression had stayed with me. Pristine corridors, closed doors, the sense of mechanisms operating behind soundproof walls. The building was run by a board of directors. 7 people whose names appeared on official communications, but who I'd never seen in person. They made decisions about resource allocation, security protocols, admissions, and apparently relocations. Everything filtered down through coordinators like Marcus. Professional, pleasant, utterly opaque. I started watching the patterns more carefully. When security moved through the building, when residents were called to meetings, when announcements were made, there was a rhythm to it, predictable, almost musical, until it changed. The first sign was subtle, increased security presence in common areas, not threatening, just there, more grey suits standing near exits, more checkpoints between floors. They smiled when they checked your identification, but they checked it every time now, even if they'd seen you an hour before. The second sign was the meetings. All residents were required to attend a series of orientations, reorientations, they called them, updates on building policies, reminders about protocols, refreshers on emergency procedures. The content was banal, the requirement wasn't. At the third reorientation, a woman I didn't recognize stood at the front of the assembly room on the 20th floor. She wore grey like the security personnel, but her suit was tailored differently. More authority. She had dark hair pulled back severely and a face that looked like it had been designed to convey concern without feeling it. "We want to thank you all for your continued cooperation," she said. Her voice was smooth, practiced. "Summit Tower exists because of our collective commitment to order and safety. In these challenging times, it's more important than ever that we maintain the standards that make this community possible." Applause. Scattered, obligatory. "However," she continued, "we've identified some concerns. Nothing serious, but we need to ensure that everyone understands the importance of unity, of trust, of maintaining the boundaries that protect us all." She paused. "Let the words settle. If you see anything unusual, report it. If you hear anything concerning, report it. If you have questions about anyone's behavior, report it. We're all responsible for each other's safety." The message was clear. Inform on your neighbors or become suspect yourself. The fourth sign was the cameras. They'd always been there. Small black domes in ceiling corners. But suddenly there were more of them. Corridors that had been monitored by one camera now had 3. Common areas bristled with lenses. Even the stairwells, which almost nobody used, sprouted surveillance equipment. I wondered what they were looking for. Or who. James Rivera disappeared 2 weeks after our conversation. No announcement. Just empty apartment. Possessions untouched. I stood in the hallway outside his door and felt something cold settle in my chest. Not quite fear, more like recognition. The sense of a pattern completing itself. He'd warned me to be careful. He'd mentioned Dr. Vance. He was gone. I went back to my apartment and burned my notes. Dropped the papers into the sink, used a lighter I'd been saving for emergencies, watched the names and dates curl into ash. Washed the residue down the drain with water that ran clear and clean and contaminated only by my paranoia. Then I went to dinner. The dining areas were designed to encourage community. Long tables, shared spaces, food served family style from central dishes. You couldn't avoid interacting with people. That was intentional. I sat next to a woman named Teresa who worked in administration. She was explaining something about supply chain logistics to a man I didn't recognize. I ate mechanically, rice that had been grown in the hydroponic gardens, vegetables that tasted like they'd been engineered to taste like vegetables, meat that might have been Brahmin or might have been something else, but at least it wasn't glowing. Across the room, security personnel stood near the exits. They weren't eating, just watching. Teresa noticed my attention. "They're here for our protection," she said quietly. "From what?" "Everything outside." She smiled, but her eyes were cautious. "We're lucky to be here. It's important to remember that." The script again. So polished, so perfect. "Very lucky," I agreed. I started varying my routines. Nothing dramatic, just small changes. Taking different routes to work, eating at different times, attending different social gatherings. Not avoiding anything, just becoming less predictable. I didn't know if it mattered. The cameras saw everything anyway. But it gave me the illusion of control. The illusion was all I had left. Winter came. Or what passed for winter now. The temperature outside dropped into ranges that would kill you slower than the radiation. The haze turned from brown to gray. Rain fell sometimes, and when it did, it left residue on the windows that had to be cleaned immediately before it etched the glass. Inside, the temperature remained exactly 72 degrees. I was working in one of the mechanical spaces on the 33rd floor when I found it. A modification to the ventilation system, recent, professional. Someone had installed a bypass valve that allowed air to be redirected from the standard circulation pattern into a separate duct system. I followed the ductwork. It led down, through floor after floor, into spaces I didn't have clearance to access. I stopped following it. That night I lay in bed listening to the silence and trying to decide what I'd actually found. Could be nothing. Legitimate infrastructure modification. Buildings this size needed constant adjustment. Could be something else. I didn't sleep. The next morning there was a notice in my inbox. All residents with engineering clearances were required to attend a technical briefing. Mandatory. Time and location specified. I'd never received a notice like that before. The briefing was held in a conference room on the 58th floor, 12 of us, all the building's primary maintenance and engineering personnel. We sat around a table that was too large for the group, which made the empty chairs look intentional, symbolic. A man in a grey suit stood at the head of the table. I didn't recognize him. He had the posture of someone military, even though his clothes said civilian. "Thank you all for coming," he said, as if we'd had a choice. "I'm here to discuss security protocols related to your access privileges." He didn't introduce himself. "We've identified some irregularities in building systems," he continued. "Nothing critical. But we need to ensure that all modifications go through proper approval channels. From this point forward, any work you do will be logged and verified. Any unusual observations will be reported immediately. Any deviations from standard procedures will require written authorization." He looked at each of us in turn. His eyes were empty of everything except assessment. "We trust you all understand the importance of maintaining system integrity. This building is a closed ecosystem. Everything affects everything. Unauthorized changes could compromise everyone's safety." Nobody spoke. "Are there any questions?" Silence. "Good. You'll all receive updated protocol documentation. Review it carefully. Sign the acknowledgement forms. Continue your excellent work." He left. We sat there for a moment, looking at each other, not saying what we were all thinking. We were being warned. I went back to work. Logged everything. Reported everything. Did exactly what I was told and nothing more. But I kept thinking about that ventilation bypass. 2 more people disappeared over the next month. A teacher who ran educational programs for the handful of children in the building, a man who'd worked in waste management, different skills, different floors, different social circles. The only connection was that they'd both been there for years, both integrated, both seemingly secure. The security presence increased again, grey suits in every corridor, checkpoints at every elevator. They were polite, always polite, but there were more of them, and they were everywhere. And then they started the interviews. Random selection, they said, routine security reviews, nothing to worry about, just making sure everyone was happy and healthy and had no concerns they wanted to share. My interview was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon, room 6147, 61st floor. I rode the elevator up with 2 security personnel flanking me. They didn't speak, didn't look at me, just stood there radiating professional courtesy and implied threat. The room was small, white walls, a table, 3 chairs, a camera in the corner, not even bothering to hide. A woman sat behind the table. She had red hair pulled back in a braid and the kind of face that could look sympathetic or cold depending on what she needed from you. She gestured to the chair across from her. "Please, sit. I'm Jennifer Marks. I coordinate residential services." I sat. She opened a tablet, scrolled through something, looked up with a practiced smile. "You've been with us for 7 years. That's impressive. Many residents don't last that long. I like stability." "Of course," she scrolled again. "Your work record is excellent. No complaints, no issues. You're exactly the kind of resident we value." She let that sit for a moment. "Have you been happy here?" "Yes." "Do you have any concerns about the building, the systems, the community?" "No." "Have you noticed anything unusual? Any behaviors that seemed concerning?" "No." She studied me. Her smile never faltered, but something behind her eyes shifted, calibrating. "You spend a lot of time alone," she said. "My work requires focus." "Of course, but community is important too. Connection, trust, we're all in this together." "I attend the required gatherings." "Required is such a harsh word. We prefer to think of them as opportunities." She leaned back slightly. "Some residents struggle with the adjustment. They have trouble accepting that sometimes individual desires need to be subordinate to collective safety. They ask questions that undermine trust. They form opinions that create division." She paused. "We can't allow that. I'm sure you understand." I understood perfectly. "Is there anything you'd like to tell me?" she asked. "Anything you've seen or heard that we should know about?" "No." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she smiled again, closed her tablet, stood. "Thank you for your cooperation. You can go." I walked out of that room knowing I was being tested, knowing they were watching for something specific, knowing that the wrong answer, the wrong expression, the wrong moment of hesitation could be enough. I went back to my apartment and stood at the window looking out at the ruins. The sky was the color of old paper. Smoke rose from fires in the distance. Somewhere out there, people were dying in ways that were probably horrible. Radiation and starvation and violence, and all the forms of suffering that came with a world that had destroyed itself. Inside, I was safe. Inside, I was watched. I wasn't sure which was worse anymore. The water started tasting different. Subtle, just slightly off. Not contaminated, the testing protocols wouldn't allow that, but different, like they'd changed the filtration process, or added something. I asked one of the other engineers. He looked at me like I'd suggested something dangerous. "Water's fine," he said. "Same as always." I didn't push it, but I noticed other things. Residents seemed more compliant, more willing to attend gatherings, more enthusiastic about the community programming, more likely to report each other for minor infractions. Or maybe I was imagining it. Maybe the paranoia was finally catching up to me. Maybe living in a box for 7 years had eroded something essential. Maybe that was the point. The winter deepened. Outside, the world froze and burned simultaneously. Inside, everything remained exactly the same. Temperature, light, the quality of the silence. I started having dreams about water, not the clean water from the taps, the other kind. Irradiated rivers, puddles in rubble, the toxic bay visible from my window. In the dreams, I was always drinking it, always desperately thirsty, always knowing it would kill me but unable to stop. I'd wake up and go to the bathroom and drink from the tap just to remind myself that clean water existed, that I still had access to something pure. The taste was still wrong. I was called to repair an electrical fault in the sub-basement, level B7, restricted area. I'd need an escort. 2 security personnel took me down. The elevators had changed below ground level, different controls, different aesthetic, no clean white walls. Just concrete and exposed wiring and the hum of serious machinery. The fault was in a junction box near the water processing center. Simple repair, 20 minutes of work. But while I was there, I saw the tanks. Massive, floor to ceiling, lined up in rows that extended beyond what I could see in the dim lighting. Each one labeled with codes I didn't recognize. Each one connected to pipes that fed up into the building. One of the security personnel noticed me looking. "Eyes on your work," he said, not threatening, just stating fact. I finished the repair, logged it, went back upstairs. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about those tanks, about water that tasted different, about compliance and community and the way people had started changing, about how easy it would be to put something in the water, something that made people calmer, more agreeable, more willing to accept, about how nobody would question it because questioning meant becoming a problem. I thought about saying something, reporting it, but to who? The security personnel? The coordinators? The invisible board of directors who made all the decisions? Everyone who could do anything was part of the system that might be doing something. I said nothing. 3 weeks later, I saw Dr. Vance. It was late. I'd been working on a generator issue on the 43rd floor. I was taking the stairs back up insomnia, and paranoia made elevators feel like traps when I heard voices from one of the restricted corridors. I looked through the small window in the access door. She was standing between 2 security personnel. She looked smaller than I remembered, thinner. Her gray eyes were the same, but something in her face had changed. Broken, one of the security personnel was talking to her quietly. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see her response. The way she nodded, the way she held herself, the way she looked at nothing. They walked her toward an elevator I'd never seen before. She went willingly. Then they were gone. I stood there for a long time, trying to process what I'd seen, trying to decide what it meant that she hadn't left, that she was still here, that wherever she'd disappeared to had been inside the building all along. I went back to my apartment, locked the door, sat in the dark. The next morning I went to work, did my job, attended a gathering, smiled at the right moments, nodded in agreement with opinions I didn't have about topics I didn't care about. I drank the water. I tasted the difference every time, but I drank it anyway because refusing would be noticed, because deviation was death, because survival required swallowing what you were given and pretending it nourished you. That's what I learned, living in Summit Tower. Wealth hadn't saved us. It had just built a prettier cage, given us clean walls to stare at while we disappeared one by one, given us the illusion of choice while removing every option except compliance. We weren't residents, we were specimens, kept alive because we were useful, eliminated when we became inconvenient, fed and watered and studied like something in a laboratory designed to test exactly how much a person would tolerate before they broke. I lasted another year. I stopped varying my routines, stopped thinking about escape, stopped imagining alternatives. I became exactly what they wanted: functional, compliant, useful. I fixed electrical systems, attended gatherings, drank water that tasted wrong and told myself it was fine. I watched other people disappear and didn't ask questions. I smiled at security personnel who smiled back with their empty eyes. I became a model resident, and then one day I wasn't useful anymore. The notice came in the morning. Nothing dramatic, just a message in my inbox. Report to room 6147, bring nothing. I knew what it meant. I thought about running. But where? The building was sealed. Security at every exit. Even if I made it outside, the wasteland would kill me slower and more painfully than whatever they had planned. I thought about fighting. But I'd seen how that ended. Quiet disappearance. Same result, just messier. So, I showered. Put on clean clothes. Stood at my window one last time and looked at the ruins spread out below. The toxic bay, the skeletal bridge, the smoke from distant fires. I thought about all the times I'd felt lucky to be inside, safe, protected. I thought about the sound of ice in crystal. I rode the elevator up with 2 security personnel. They didn't speak. I didn't ask questions. Room 6147 was the same. White walls, table, chairs, camera in the corner. Jennifer Marks was waiting. She smiled her practiced smile. "Please sit." I sat. "You've served this community well," she said. "We appreciate your contributions. But we've identified some concerns about your integration, some resistance to the collective good. Nothing personal, just patterns we've observed." I didn't respond. "We're going to help you adjust," she continued. "Get you more aligned with community values. It's a simple process, temporary. Most people find it quite beneficial." She stood. 2 more security personnel entered. "If you'll come with us." They took me down, not to my apartment, not to any floor I recognized, down to the sub-basement, past the water processing center, past the massive tanks, into corridors that smelled like antiseptic and something else, something organic. They put me in a room, small, white, a bed, a chair, a door that locked from the outside. "Someone will be with you soon," one of them said. Then I was alone. I don't know how long I was there. Hours, days, the lights never changed. No windows, no clocks, just white walls and silence and the sound of my own breathing. They brought food, water. The same food as always. The same water with the same wrong taste. I ate. I drank. I waited. Eventually someone came. A doctor, not Dr. Vance, someone new, young, professionally sympathetic. "We're going to help you feel better," he said. "More connected, more at peace with your place in the community." He had a syringe. I thought about refusing, but what was the point? They'd just force it, and fighting would only make it worse. I held out my arm. The needle went in smooth and cold. "You'll feel better soon," he said. He was right. Everything got softer, easier. The edges of my anger smoothed out. The questions that had been eating at me seemed less important. The paranoia faded. I felt calm. I felt compliant. I felt grateful. They kept me in that room for I don't know. Time lost meaning. They'd bring food. I'd eat. They'd bring water. I'd drink. They'd bring injections. I'd accept them. Each one made me softer. Each one made me less. When they finally let me out, I went back to my apartment like nothing had happened. My room was the same. My possessions untouched. My window still faced west. I went back to work. Fixed electrical systems, attended gatherings, smiled at security personnel. I drank the water without tasting anything wrong. I was happy. I was integrated. I was everything they wanted. But sometimes, late at night when the medication wore thin, I'd stand at the window and look at the ruins and remember what I used to feel. The anger, the fear, the desperate need to understand what was being done to us. I'd remember that the wasteland outside was terrible, but it was honest about being terrible. Inside Summit Tower, we lived in comfort and safety and control. We had everything we needed except the ability to leave, except the right to question, except the freedom to be anything other than what they shaped us to be. We were the rich, the lucky ones, the survivors. We lived behind clean walls and armed guards in a tower that rose above the chaos. And we were just as trapped as anyone outside, just in a cage that smelled better, that felt softer. That convinced us we were fortunate while it slowly erased everything that made us human. I think about James Rivera sometimes, about Dr. Vance, about all the others who disappeared and came back changed, about whether they remember who they used to be or if the medications took that too. I think about the sound of ice in crystal and whether I'll ever care about something that small again. I think about what I gave up for safety, for clean water, for temperature-controlled air and food that didn't glow. I think about whether it was worth it. And then the medication pulls me back under and I stop thinking at all. Because that's what life is like for the rich in the wasteland. We survive, we endure, we're protected and provided for and carefully controlled. We're kept like valuable equipment, maintained, adjusted when we malfunction, eliminated when we're no longer useful. We drink water that tastes wrong and tell ourselves it's fine. We smile at people who treat us like specimens. We accept injections that make us grateful for our cages. We look out windows at a world that's honest about being broken, and we convince ourselves we're better off inside a world that lies about being whole. And maybe we are better off. Maybe survival is worth any price. Maybe comfort justifies compliance. Maybe I'm lucky to be here, in my clean white box, with my temperature-controlled air and my filtered water and my regular injections that keep me from asking questions that have no safe answers. Maybe this is the best anyone can hope for now. Maybe this is what winning looks like. I stand at my window and watch the smoke rise from distant fires, and I think about ice in crystal, and I feel nothing at all.